So hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Vanook, the Executive Director of Library Reads. And thank you so much for joining us tonight for another installment of Murder at the Library. It's the book club brought to you by Sourcebooks and Baker and Taylor. Tonight, we're also streaming this event on Facebook Live, which is something new for us this time around. So welcome to everyone watching on Facebook. Do let us know if you've got any glitches going on. We'll try and attack that. We've got some folks behind the scenes working on the tech stuff. But I am thrilled to be here on screen with best-selling author Stuart Turton, who's going to be discussing his latest twisty thriller. It's a book that's been described as Stephen King horror with a Sherlock Holmes-esque detective and a dash of Pirates of the Caribbean. It's called The Devil and the Dark Water. So before we begin our discussion with Stu, I have a few housekeeping items to make everyone aware of. There will be multiple choices throughout the evening to win prizes. So all you need to do is to participate in one of our trivia polls that will pop up on the screen, or ask a question of Stuart, and then you'll be entered to win a mystery prize pack and other fun mystery themed goodies from Sourcebooks. So don't worry, I'll let you know when there's something to participate, so you'll be all set. If you're participating with us tonight via Facebook Live, we will have our moderator enter the question in the comments section, and you can answer back there as well. If you have questions for us to ask Stu and are attending via Zoom, please put those in the Q&A section as opposed to the chat where they might get lost. So feel free to use that chat to say hi, to chat with fellow participants in the audience. But if you've got a specific question we'd like to try and get to, put that in the separate Q&A box so that we can keep that in a separate chat stream there. If you're on Facebook and want to ask a question, just go ahead and enter it in the questions, or I'm sorry, in the comments, and one of the moderators will zip it on over to Zoom for me to read. So let's begin with a little background on Stuart. His 2018 debut, The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, made him an international best-selling and highly acclaimed author, with reviews from New York Times best-selling authors like Sarah Pinborough, who described his book as, quote, "If Agatha Christie and Terry Pratchett had LSD-fueled sex, this would be their acid trip book baby. Darkly comic, mind-blowingly twisty, a locked room mystery like none other." Unquote. So that is hard to beat a blurb like that. It's also very fun to read out a blurb like that, in case you're wondering. So that book made several best books of the year list, including BuzzFeed, Book Riot, and Harper's Bazaar. And it was a September 2018 Library Reads pick. Yay!
Yay!
So Stuart's latest thriller, and the book that we're here to talk about tonight, The Devil and the Dark Water, has been called compulsively readable by the New York Times Book Review, received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Book Page, and Kirkus Reviews, and has been praised by many best-selling authors within the genre. Stu is a full-time writer who lives in West London with his wife and daughter. Hi, Stuart. It's really nice to see you tonight.
Hi, Rebecca. How are you going?
I am great. I know it's late where you are. It's like midnight right now. So thank you so much for staying up late, staying up to party with us, right?
Well, it was either that or ask all you guys to wake up at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and that seemed
Right.
hideously unfair.
Well,
So
I very much appreciate you letting me do this at 6 instead of at 2 in the morning. So thank you. So let's dive right in to talk about the book. How does that sound?
that sounds amazing. Can I just first offer a few apologies, if you don't mind? I've got slight sniffles. I am not dying of COVID. Anybody, please don't hang up or just go and run away. It's just the winter sniffles. We're fine. And also, my webcam is quite precarious at the top of my screen. So if at any point falls off, again, I have not died. My webcam has just fallen off. So it's not me toppling sideways.
Excellent. It's just the webcam. He hasn't passed out. That's good.
That's it. I'm still alive.
I appreciate the warning. So both your debut and your latest, The Devil and the Dark Water, are clever mysteries that are filled with intrigue, suspense, and surprise at every turn. The reader is never quite sure where you're going next, and I think that that's part of the excitement of reading it and what makes them so original. So we've actually had someone call you the Mad Hatter of crime, and I think that's pretty appropriate. So we have a question posed from one of our participating libraries, which is the Granville County Library System in North Carolina. Shout out to those folks. And I thought this was a great one to open up our discussion with tonight. Where do you get the inspiration for writing and telling these kinds of twisty tales?
It's strange. First of all, hello, Granville. It's lovely. Thank you for the question. I don't know. It's odd that, isn't it? Because that's a question you get asked a lot, and you should have a really off-pat, brilliant answer to, and I don't. I just kind of stumble around the world being a moron, and I encounter things that are interesting to me, and they stick in my head. So the first novel, Seven Deaths, that came from my love of Agatha Christie when I was an 8-year-old, and that was those series of novels made me want to be a novelist. So I was always going to write an Agatha Christie novel. This one, Devil, The Boat, 1634, it's set in the Dutch East India Company. That all came from me traveling around Australia when I was 23. And I ended up in a maritime museum because I've missed my flight out of Australia, again, because I'm an idiot. And I had no money. It was the only free thing to do. So I went to this museum and I came across this exhibition about a wreck called the Batavia. And it was just a brilliant, harrowing, awful story with so much history and so much adventure and so much terror. And it stuck with me. It was just like a splinter. It never let me go. So, and the idea for the book I'm currently writing, that also came from when I'm traveling. But I can't talk about that because I can't really talk about that book. Otherwise, my editor just floats onto the back of the camera and shoots me in the head.
No.
Yeah, no, not this Stu. In 2 years, we talk about this.
Right. Hold that thought is what they're saying, right? So the Lebanon Public Library in Ohio and the Fitzwilliam Town Library in New Hampshire both have the same question, which I am not surprised. When I do these kind of interviews, we often like to ask this because the audience is library folks, after all. They want to know about the best folks ever, right? So being library folks, they want to know about your research process. So both of these libraries sent in questions saying that they appreciated how you've created this world so vividly for readers in the book. So tell us, what kind of research did you do to make The Devil in the Dark Water as accurate as possible as far as time and place?
So tons, absolutely. It was really helpful with Devil because I had, as I said before, the inspiration came from an exhibition about a real life shipwreck. So that was my starting point. I went and researched this actual shipwreck. And that was the wreck of the Batavia in 1629. If anybody else wants to go and follow that research, and I recommend you do, because that story by itself is the most bizarre, weird, scary, wonderful thing you will ever read. So I started with that, and that got me really into this time period, which was these boats, because this is about 1629, which is when my book is set. They were sending galleons, just hundreds of galleons a year from Amsterdam all the way out to the East Indies to collect spices and then ship them back. 1 in 3 people who got on one of these boats would never ever come back. Like, they would die at sea, they would die in the East Indies, they would catch malaria, shipboard accident, anything would happen, but 1 in 3. So that meant that if you got on one of these ships, you had a good reason to be on the ship. And by good reason, I mean terrible reason. You were running from something terrible had happened to you. You had to get away. So all of a sudden, there was just immediately built-in intrigue. So the first thing I did is I went and talked to a bunch of people who had something to do with that exhibition. So I rang the museum, explained what I was doing. I was writing a book about it, and just talked to them. And then I got all this information. Then one of them told me that the boat had been rebuilt in the Netherlands in a place called Lelystad. And they were like, they built it using the original construction materials. They sail it around. Now it's a floating museum. So I caught a flight, spent 2 days walking around that. And it's the most miraculous thing. Again, when we can ever travel and we're all let out of our homes, please go and see that, because it's stunning. It's a beautiful, beautiful boat. So I spent 2 days on that, and that's where the claustrophobia of the novel comes in, because I was on that boat with 30 other people, and it felt like the smallest, tightest, most cramped space in the world. And back in the day, there would have been 300 people on that ship. So you can imagine how awful it would have been, and the smells and the sights. And again, there's the people walking past me on the ship, maybe, it was a hot day, so some of them smelled just a little bit. So you start getting all this... You start getting this detail just by being there, and you can smell the wood, and you have to hunch down and all these other things. And then, so once I'd done that and I pestered everyone, and I learned as much as I could about seafaring from being on that boat, I asked all the volunteers, the people on the ship, How would this have worked? So I learned about dead reckoning, celestial navigation, all of these things. I learned how sailors would have, gone to the toilet on one of these ships. I asked every conceivable ridiculous question. How did they wash the clothes? What did they drink? And once I felt solid with all that information, I went back to England and I sat myself in the British Library and just had them bring me as much historical documentation from that point as I could get my hands on. And that was diaries from people who'd been on board these boats. It was captains' logs of captains who'd sailed these ships and their experiences. And I just absorbed it all. I mean, it's brilliant, brilliant stuff. And I just very quickly learned that this voyage was hell. It was hell for anybody who got on it. So once I had that, I was like, I've just got to make this voyage hell for every character in my book. That's what I've got to do.
That sort of permeated the whole underpinnings of the book.
Because I genuinely believe if you do the historical research and you read all of it, you don't then have to say, you don't have to have a paragraph where you explain how sailing worked in 1634, 1629. It will just come out. You'll just, when you need it, it's osmosis. Like you've got it, it sinks into you, and when you need it, it'll seep back out again. So it's really strange. The amount, I spent about 3 months planning and doing the historical research. And I think about 2 minutes worth of that research actually came out into the book, but hopefully it just kind of permeates it.
Yeah.
Because you don't want too much. You don't want it to feel like a Wikipedia entry.
Well, right. I mean, and that's the difference between writing nonfiction and fiction. You've got your artistic license to create your story, but if you're coming at it a real time period, a real shipwreck, etc., it's great to have that knowledgeable background, even if you're not putting all those real details in. I think that really kind of comes through in the writing. We can tell that this wasn't just something you made up completely out of nowhere. It was a real ship. It was a real time period where that kind of thing could happen, or maybe it couldn't happen, but it was, and it gave it a real realistic bend to it. So that's really great.
I mean, that entire thing it's really strange, isn't it? Because you talk about the nonfiction, fiction aspect of the book, and like the nonfiction thing is about getting these details across and sort of like illuminating how things worked in that period.
Yes.
My focus is making sure that you feel like you're in it. I want my books to feel dirty. I want you to feel like you're in the book, not sort of 50 Shades dirty, like actually grimy dirty. Very different, maybe third novel.
That's maybe your next book. You can...
Maybe, 50 Shades of Turton, who knows what's coming, but I want it to feel real. When you start reading the pages, I want you to feel like you're on these decks and you can feel the tension of the boat and you can feel how it would have worked, and you can't possibly do that unless the author knows for a fact how they thought it smelled and looked and what would have been there when somebody looks in that direction. What are they seeing? Like, how would it appear to them? So that's my focus. Again, I'm not overly interested in telling you what 1629 was like, but I absolutely have to understand what my characters were doing in 1629 and what they would have thought about things and what their attitude would have been towards things. And that's the only way to convince you guys that these characters did live in 1629.
Absolutely. Got it. So speaking of the characters, so I love that you've included some rather intelligent and fierce women in this book. So tell us a little bit about your trio of female investigators and how you decided to put them in the story and their place in the story.
Again, it begins with me being an idiot. So many things do, Rebecca, so many things do. They start from a position of utter stupidity on my... So I'm going to cycle back a little bit to my first book, if that's okay, with 7.5 Deaths. The 7.5 Deaths, if anybody doesn't know that novel, it's a Agatha Christie murder mystery set in a Groundhog Day loop, and the day keeps repeating until the investigator works out who killed Evelyn. It was meticulously planned, as you can imagine. It took me 3 months of intensive research and trying to work it out and work out every plot detail. And when I started writing it, I lingered over every sentence and paragraph. So I knew that book inside and out in a way that I know my books very well, but that book I'll never know, because I spent maybe about 4 years writing that. I'm an editor and I was just in it so much. And one of the very first events I ever did, I should also mention in that book, sorry, every time the character wakes up and the day starts again, he's in the body of a different guest in the house. And one of the first events I did, a little old lady at the front, she put a hand up at the questions part, and she was like, "Why doesn't your main character ever jump into the body of a woman?" And I had no answer for her whatsoever. It was not planned. It was just something I'd simply overlooked. All that planning and all that thinking, I'd overlooked the most self-evident thing that I could do. And I want every book I write, I want my characters to constantly bump into challenges. I want them to have to overcome things in order to sort of achieve their goals. That's how you find out who these people are. And that book was set in the 1920s. So the woman in that house who's going about solving things would have been looked at very oddly. She would have had to have a certain character. It was just a massively missed opportunity. And I've never stopped kicking myself about it. And it just really genuinely pissed me off. So, and it still does. Even talking about it now, I'm slightly angry at myself, my younger self, for making that mistake, and I should have done it. So when it came to Devil, I knew from the start there was going to be strong, great female characters in it, because the opportunity, especially 1629 again, to be a female with agency in 1629 on one of these books wouldn't have happened. So that is the biggest piece of historical license that's in this book, that these characters have any agency at all. They would not have had in the period.
Sure. Yeah.
So I wanted to put them front and center. So I started to start thinking about how would they get around the boat? What would they have to achieve just to even get out of their cabin to solve this mystery? And that was just brilliant. And then the more I wrote them and their relationship and their dynamic with each other, the more it grew and the more of the novel they wanted, especially Sarah, who's my third sort of main protagonist. She was initially just a secondary character. She was supposed to be a suspect, a bit more than the others, maybe, first among equals. But the more I wrote her, the more interesting she became, the more of the novel she wanted, the more investigating she wanted, the more she determined she became. And generally, she pushed her way to the forefront of that novel in a way that honestly wasn't intended. And it was just wonderful. So every time she demanded more of the novel, I gave it to her. So she just became front and center. It was great. I loved writing it that way.
Oh, I love that. I think it's really, I bet everyone listening right now is thinking the same thing I am, that it is so fascinating to hear authors talk about characters that have sort of push themselves into your writing, right? Like you came up with them as an idea and then they became someone. And that's really to hear you talk about that Sarah just decided she was going to be, that she was front and center, she was going to take over. That's really cool to kind of hear that, how that works. So thanks for sharing that with us. I know that kind of stuff.
And in converse, though, I would say that Aaron, who was supposed to be the protagonist, he definitely is. He wanted to sink back into the novel. He wanted less to do. So she ended up getting more of what I originally envisioned he would get. So it was interesting to be guided by the characters in that way.
That is really cool. Oh, I love it. I love it. So switching away from the characters and talking about some of the plots here for a second, the next question I have is, so as you mentioned earlier in your first book as well, and with this one, there's so many threads to keep track of. So I know when I was reading 7.5 Deaths, I that the invitation that was in the front of the book, like I made notes on it for like who people it's, and I tried to keep track as I was reading, and I couldn't imagine how it was to be writing that, keeping that track. So how do you keep these things straight? You've also got all of these threads and twists in The Devil in the Dark Water. So how do you keep things straight for yourself? And if you don't, then what's if maybe that wasn't hard for you and you're like, oh no, I do it all the time. If that wasn't a challenge, what was your biggest challenge, would you say, in writing?
It's interesting because it's both. So just to go over it, the way I planned these two books and the way I'm planning my third book is that I give myself 3 months and I won't write a word of the book. And in those 3 months, sorry, I'm planning it. I'm thinking about it. I'm just trying to think about cool things that could happen, who these characters are, roughly what it's going to be about, what's the crime, who's going to solve it, how are they going to get there. And then that generally at some point, very organically after a couple of weeks, will lead me to a murder usually. And then I want an impossible murder. I love impossible murders. I love locked room mysteries. And then you've got to work backwards. And the most important thing for me is why you would commit a crime in that overly convoluted way. Because I'm perfectly happy with a bit of heightened reality in a murder mystery. I think the best ones always have it. I like that. But you've got to have a semblance of humanity within the act and some reason why it's happening this way. So I start thinking about that. And once I've got that, I can then work out who did it, who's going to solve it, how's that going to happen? And then I start plotting. And then that's my 3 months. And then in the background for this one was all the historical research was happening simultaneously, and it just kind of organically feeds into each other, because I wanted on Devil, I want the boat to be, and again in 7.5 Deaths, my first novel, I don't want the boat or the house just to be background. I want them to feel integral to the murder mystery. I want them to feel like they're part of the story. Characters
almost like another character. Like that's right. That's what I felt about the house and the grounds in the first book, and definitely that's the boat in The Devil in the Dark Water. They're almost like a character. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I want to imbue them with that personality, and I want to make them more. So I start thinking about that, and then I plan them. After that, I plan them meticulously. So first page to last page, I know everything that happens. Every chapter, I know exactly what's going to happen. And then once I do that, a really weird thing's happened. It's happened in both books, and it used to happen when I was a journalist on long form features. I internalized that plan completely, so it goes in, and then I never look at the plan again. Like I just don't know. I don't know what. And then I can write, and I write out of chronology. So I sit down at my computer every day, and we've spoken about this before. So I apologize because me and Rebecca have talked before, everybody. Yes. So you know, the hardest thing about writing for me is not the book, and it's not the plot, and it's not the metaphors. It's sitting down at my computer and writing. It's not a thing that I'm naturally inclined to be doing for 6 to 8 hours a day. I'd rather be outside doing almost anything else. Sitting down on a computer is hard, and if I'm not going to write something interesting that day, it's almost impossible. So I have to make every chapter and every day entertaining to me personally to write. That's why my books are so twisty. It's why they have so many cliffhangers. It's why it's me entertaining myself and keeping myself involved.
Love it.
So what I end up doing inevitably, because every book is going to have bits that as an author you don't want to write. They're going to have bits. For me, it's exposition. I don't like exposition. And what I'll end up doing is I take about a year. I take about maybe 13 months to write a book, 14 months, a bit longer for Devil. And what I'll end up doing is writing all the great stuff for the first 7 to 8 months, and then leaving all the exposition to the end of it. It's like pushing all your vegetables to one side and just having, you know what I mean? And then I'll just come to that. So the final 3 months of every book are an absolute chore for me.
Oh, interesting. Wow. So this sort of leads us into a question that I have for you, and that I've actually seen several people have variations on this, because we always want to know. Tell us a little bit about your writing process. So you did just explain, right? You've got the last 3 months or that kind of pushing that out. But what about how about your daily, do you get up and say, here's XYZ hours that I'm going to write, or do you have pages that you want to do, or what's the deal? And someone earlier had asked, they also are curious, has that changed at all this year for the pandemic? Have you found yourself with more time on your hands, less time? Maybe you're like me and it's more time, but less motivation. Time is meaningless right now. So tell us a little bit about your writing process.
So I'll start in reverse order if that's okay, because the pandemic changed absolutely
nothing. Time is meaningless.
Time is meaningless. So, but as a novelist, time is kind of meaningless anyway. It's much more meaningful to my editor, who sets me my deadline, and slightly meaningless to me as I sail past it. 5 times for Devil. I apologize to everyone involved in that process. The thing that's changed, what I used to do was the quintessential inspired author thing. I simply wouldn't work on the days when I didn't feel like it. And this was on my first novel, 7.5 Deaths, because at that point I was still working as a freelance journalist. So I'd have days where I had that work to be getting on with. And then I would have, say, Wednesday, because what I used to do was I would take enough paid work to pay all my bills and go for a pint with my mates. And then once I had that money, I'd stop and I would spend the rest of the week writing the novel, because obviously at that point I didn't have an agent, I didn't have a deadline, there was no publisher. So that's the way I worked, and it was just me and my girlfriend. And so if I fancied writing at 2 o'clock in the morning and working all night, I'd do that. If I didn't want to work all day, there was one awful incident where I was supposed to be working, and I spent a Thursday, Friday and Saturday watching every episode of Scrubs, which is a terrible, terrible sitcom, but I just watched all of it for 3 days, pretending I was getting some inspiration. So I had days like that. And then my daughter was born, she's 2.5 now, so she's born 2.5 years ago. And she was born, and that just all went out the window. I couldn't do that anymore. So I've gone now to fixed hours. I work from 9 to 5. I treat it like a job as much as I can. I don't work weekends because that's family time.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I divide my day is that I write in the afternoon. So all new stuff, 1,000 words. So I try to write 1,000 to 1,300 words. I find for me personally that if I go over 1,300 words a day, it's crap. Like it's just bad. I don't know what it is. If it's a psychological switch, well, it's too many words and I get dragged down in it. But if I get to that level, I just stop, even if I think I'm on a roll, because it'll be bad. And then I spend the morning editing what I wrote the day before. So that editing process lets me get back into the book. It reminds me what I was writing yesterday. It reminds me of the tone. It reminds me of my characters. So it's got a dual purpose. I edit constantly, which I like, but it gives me a sort of slow on ramp back into my own book. And the other thing that I always do is that just as part of the process is I never start on a blank page. I find that the hardest thing in the world to do. So I always if I go over a chapter, I would never, so even as I'm writing my 1,200 words, I would make sure that I've started the next chapter so that the next day I can go straight into, I've got a beachhead into that chapter. Because if I start the next day and there's just a blank page, I'm screwed.
It gets too hard to get started, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, precisely. It's just, there's too many possibilities, whereas I find that the previous chapter guides the next chapter. So if you're already in it, you might as well just let it lead you into the next chapter and then carry on from there.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing all that with us. I know everybody likes those kind of nitty-gritty details. So I think this is a good time for our first trivia question. Ooh. So we're going to play a game called The Devil's in the Details. So there are going to be questions that pop up on the screen in just a moment. It's going to be a passage from the book, actually, presented with a name or place missing. So you need to remember the details, get it, devil in the details, of the story to pick the correct answer. For our Facebook Live participants, the question is going to be entered into the comments section on Facebook, and you should submit your answers back in that comment section. But here on Zoom, I just saw it flash briefly, and we'll get it back up here in just a moment. There it is. So we've got question number 1. I see question 1 and 2 coming up, but let's just focus on number 1 for right now. So we've got with the passage there. I'll let you all read that and decide who, where Fletcher fled to. So while I give people a minute to make their answers on that, I have just sort of a quick question. What kind of books do you like to read? Do you like to read these twisty things? Is that what drew you to writing them? Or do you read, like, are you a 50 Shades of Grey kind of guy? Since you brought it up.
Yeah, and also bringing things up is a poor choice of phrase for 50 Shades of Grey, isn't it? I read all sorts. No, I don't read twisty turny stuff generally. I don't read crime a lot, because the crime that I love and kind of the vein that I'm writing in seems to be the Agatha Christie, Sherlock Holmes, and now a little bit of Chandler, kind of that period. And I read all of that when I was a kid, when I'm between about sort of 8 and about 14. And that's the stuff that's imprinted on me. And then I drifted away from it. I tend to read a lot of literary fiction. So I just finished Hamnet by Margaret O'Farrell, which was, I know I'm late to that party, but that was just absolutely wonderful. I love the things that draw me to writing are the things that are unique to books, that are unique to novels. And that for me actually isn't plot and twist. It's a great simile. It's a great piece of writing. It's a great paragraph, or it is a structure, an unusual structure. So someone who's taken a novel and twisted it around and messed around with it and put things where you don't think they should go. So my favorite ever book, for example, is The God of Small Things by Anara T. Roy. I adore that and read that every year. And I always find something new because it does both. It's got beautiful, beautiful writing all the way through, but also the structure of it's really interesting and it takes a little while to get on handle on. LA Confidential, which is a crime novel, but it's just entirely, again, structure, the prose, the way it's written, so different, so unique. So House of Leaves, any book that is going to mess with structure and have beautiful words on the page, you'll find me reading that.
That's right up, right, what you're looking for. Awesome. Very cool. All right, so our poll has closed, and let's see if we can bring up the results there for the first Devils in the Details question. So the correct answer was B. And we had people already answer the second one as well, which I'm not sure if we're going to bring that up a second time or not. But otherwise, there's the questions. Very good. Hope people had fun with that. If it's still on your screen, you can go ahead and just close that off. Thanks for participating in that, everyone. So let's see here. So we've covered a couple of questions from our participating book club libraries, and I also have a couple more. So we have a question from Middlebury Community Library in Indiana. So they say that the title of the book really kind of draws people in, Devil in the Dark Water. It's very dramatic and projects this idea of suspense. And they'd like to know how you came up with the title for the book.
Oh, I just banged my head against a brick wall for 2 years while writing the rest of the book. It wouldn't be far off what actually happened. I didn't have that title until the very last minute. I find titles exceptionally difficult. Found it very difficult for the debut. I found it very difficult for this one. I think that it eventually came out because I was doing the edit on the book. So up until that point, it was just I had a variety of titles. It was Untitled Book 3 for ages. It was what was the one that I sent to my editor? I think, apologies for the language. It was Why Can't I Get a Title for This Fucking Book? At one point was the title I was riding with. It had a variety of these sorts of titles. And I just couldn't get it. I couldn't find a title because I thought that the 7 Deaths, 7.5 Deaths in the US, it was a great title, and I loved that title, and I was so proud of it. And it did so much heavy lifting for the book. I think it was like I knew that people walked past and were buying that book solely off the title. And when I saw it was intriguing, and it was just great. And I wanted a title that had a simpler impact and was as important to the novel. I didn't just want it to be the title or something. So I put a lot of pressure on it, and I was editing the book. I mean, honestly, like the proofs were going out to reviewers probably the week, 2 weeks later, and they were pressuring me for a title. I had nothing. And I read there's a passage at the end of the book where a sailor talks about the dark water and what's in the dark water. And that had come from a piece of historical research, and I'd loved it so much that I'd put it in, and then I'd edited it to make it more ominous and tie it back into the plot. And I read that and was like, wait, that's the title. And I didn't want it to be just dark water. It needed to be more. So like it's starting the books about demons, and then just those along the line. Eventually I was just like D, the devil and the dark water. That's the poetry of it. That's what the book is. That's what I'm going to do. And I think my wife at some point was like, but isn't it a demon and not a devil? I'm like, shut up. I don't need to hear from you right now. Go away from me.
Semantics.
Yes, it doesn't. This is artistic license at this point, and also I don't want to wait another 2.5 years for the title, so this is what we're going with.
I love it. That's great. Oh, very cool. Next question. So the Monroe County Public Library in Pennsylvania and the DeForest Area Public Library in Wisconsin sent in similar questions, so I'm going to combine them here. They'd like to know, what was the highlight for you in writing this book? And then what was the easiest part and the hardest part?
Oh, the highlight, I think, is the same as every book, which is the day I hand it to my editor and I don't have to write it anymore.
Yep.
Which sounds flippant, but it's kind of true, because I don't start a novel, and I would never pick a novel to write that didn't have a very grand conceit at the middle. And that grand conceit has to scare me. I have to be genuinely terrified of it, in the sense that I don't know whether I can pull it off or not. I don't know whether the disparate elements will actually pull together into a whole to make a story. And this one, believe it or not, was actually more challenging than the debut, in terms of the elements didn't want to go together as easily. So I had a hard time writing it at parts, and it was a real struggle. So that day when I hand it to my editor, it's not just a day when I don't have to write it anymore. It's a day when I can say to myself, that worked, you pulled that off, congratulations. And you can start thinking about the next thing and being scared all over again. And that's lovely. I quite like that. So I think that would be the bit that I enjoyed the most. I'm sorry, what were the other two parts of the question?
So what you enjoyed the most, and then what was the easiest part and the hardest part?
The easiest part was probably Sarah. writing her, because as I said, she did the work there. She pushed herself into the story. She wanted more of it. The hardest part was probably genuinely locking, because Sammy, my Sherlock Holmes style detective in this novel, he's locked away. So at the start of the novel, he's completely locked away. And so he can't just turn up in the story and solve it all. And I've got a real bugbear about Sherlock Holmes style investigation. So the hardest part was not wheeling him out more often, was like resisting that temptation to use him as a MacGuffin, to use him as just when my plot stalled a little bit, just not to wheel him out and just push things forward a few chapters. That was always a temptation. It was like, well, Sammy could just turn up, spot something and get us moving again. But I wanted this to be Aaron's story. I wanted it to be Sarah's story. I wanted them to be doing sort of dogged investigation and sort of like learning about each other and learning through. So yeah, I think that was probably the hardest part for me, because any writer wants to take a shortcut to the end of the book, I think.
Got it. All right, very cool. So I think let's why don't we take the time right now to go to that second trivia question. So we'll have that pop up on the screen in just a moment here. There we go. So here's a passage from the book, and we want to know what character does this. So we'll take a minute and let everyone answer that. So this is a question that I already had for you, and I've seen a couple of people push it through to the Q&A too, so let's go with this one right now, is that this book has lots of supernatural elements to it, as well as folklore and superstition. So tell us, did you write it that way because you're superstition? I have a question in the comments asking if you believe in ghosts. So that's going to kind of, we'll wrap all that in there. Are you kind of into this by nature, or did this, tell us a little bit about that, the theme?
No, I'm not. I am the most annoyingly rational man on the planet you will ever meet, and it makes me insufferable in absolutely everything I do. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in the afterlife. I am an atheist. I don't believe in anything that science isn't pointing in the direction of, or I can't begin to investigate with rational thought. So I also don't like the shortcut that these things offer, like your keys go missing, a ghost did it. It's probably not. It's probably a cat. It might have been a squirrel ran through. Like, I don't like the shortcuts that they offer for rational thought. So I'm not, but I am fascinated by why we believe and why every culture believes and why every culture has ghosts and why every culture has God or a god or gods. We all do it. It's part of we all tell stories and we all make sense of the world through these myths and beliefs and superstitions. We all have them. And that fascinates me. And I'm fascinated by how we use them as well. So not just why we believe them, but why we use them to justify certain actions for good and for ill. And that bit of us, that bit is so human that I can't get enough of it. And I'm always digging into it and always trying to explore it and make sense of it. And both novels play with that quite a lot. If you feel like there's something supernatural happening to you, there's something occult, something unexplainable, it's not just trying to figure out, why that's happening and what's really behind it. It's, well, how can I use that to my advantage? What leeway does it allow me for my terrible actions or for my positive actions? So I'm always trying to get into that stuff. But no, sorry, I'm incredibly annoyingly rational.
Oh, I love it. That's great. Good answer. All right, let's bring up the answer to our, there we go. And most people got that character correct. Sarah. Very good.
Nicely done.
All right. Thanks, everyone. So, looks like we have time for questions from the audience. So this is everybody's last chance to get some questions in there. And I've been trying to read and talk at the same time, and I've got a couple picked out that we'll go with right now. So Donna asks, she says, you are a mystery master, and you also include, though, other style and genre elements. Now, you've said that you are a planner of story. So do you feel that this kind of mystery is your lane, or do you see yourself writing different kinds of stories in the future, or maybe both? Tell us a little bit about what you think.
Okay, so if this is my imaginary curtain and I'm just going to pull it aside just a little bit and we can all peek behind it. So what happens is that I submitted my first novel, my debut novel, and I wanted to write an Agatha Christie story since I was 8 years old. That's what I wrote. It went to an agent. The agent took it to a publisher. The publisher bought it and said, like, well, we like this one. Do you want to write another one? And I said yes. And the publisher wants a murder mystery. They want you to write the same sort of novel because you build up, hopefully, an audience for the first one, and they want you to write something similar for the second one. So you end up becoming a mystery novelist in a weird way because you wrote a mystery novel to start off with. And now I've just signed another 2-book deal with my UK publisher for another 2 mystery novels. So I'm a mystery novelist because that is what I've been signed up to do. Post that, I think I would like to move into another genre. I think I would like to start writing slightly different stories. Because I'm generally, as I said earlier, I'm generally interested in the structure of novels. I'm very interested in the poetry of the language and what you can do with the language. I would like to start being a little bit more experimental. But I'm also under no illusions that there may not be a financial reality to that. That may not be stuff that people just want to buy and enjoy and be entertained by. So I'll probably always have a mix of both, but I think as my career progresses, I'd like to sort of maybe be able to do a little bit of this thing when I feel like it, and maybe a little bit of this thing when I feel like it. But mystery novels will always be a part of my life, I think.
Very cool. All right. We have several questions that have come through asking about different character things. So I'm going to group those together in this next little bit here, I think. The first one, I've got someone asking, this is Michelle, who asks, why did you continually describe him as large? What were you trying to convey about him by being a giant?
That I have a real problem with strength. In our society at large, I don't like the way, and we see it all around us, that strength is it's the biggest factor at the moment in deciding somebody's worth. If you can win a fight, you have more value over the person than you won the fight over. Society looks at you as being superior in many ways. We're surrounded by bullies, and strength comes in all sorts of ways, right? It can come in political strength, it can come in financial strength, it can come in sheer size. Arendt is the biggest guy in any room he walks into, and yet he feels like the smallest guy because he stood next to the cleverest man in the world. He stood next to Sammy Pipps, who is small of stature, but is the cleverest guy. What Arendt wants is a world like myself that isn't governed by strength. He wants a world that is governed by intelligence, that's governed by rational thought, that is governed by heart and, kindness. That's what he wants. He's the biggest guy in the room, and he doesn't like his own strength. He understands what it can be used for, and he understands the men who are using it. So I'm constantly referring to Arendt as Arendt is constantly, I should put it this way, Arendt is constantly referring to himself. He's referring to his own strength. He's referring to his own size.
Right.
You stick him on a boat where it's of no use whatsoever, because being nearly 7 foot on that boat where the decks are only 4 foot high, make sure that he always looks ridiculous. He's always hunched over. He's always crouched down. He's neutralized by the boat. I never want anyone to forget that Arendt on this boat is immobilized almost. He's almost neutered by it. And he's forced to use his mind because his strength is of no value to him. Basically, there's one point in the novel where he gets into a fight and he begrudgingly does it, and he tries every other way first. So 7 Deaths does for something very, very similar. If you look at 7 Deaths, 7.5 Deaths are in the US. If you look at that novel, wherever anybody tries to brute force their way to an answer, they always fail. They always get belittled. They always get humiliated. In my novels, intelligence is everything. Cleverness is everything. And being cleverer and more cunning than your opponent is the only way you're ever gonna win. You're never gonna solve things. And behind that is always kindness. Like, the characters who are kind will always get something out of my novels.
Awesome. Got it. All right. Speaking of cleverness, we've got Jill saying that she feels like Sammy probably had a lot of backstory and a lot of history. So do you have any thoughts on bringing him back and maybe sharing some of earlier adventures with him in a future book? Or is he done? Okay.
No, it's
a one and done?
It's a one and done. I know a lot of people have been slightly frustrated by this, but my intention from the beginning was to make you feel like you'd walked into the final book of a series.
Right.
So you should feel like you've lived in the history of these characters, that they have been together for a long time. They've had lots of adventures and lots of mysteries. And I want you to feel like reading this book that you missed them, that they were written and you just hadn't missed them and you want to go back and read them. Because I like books that feel like they're lived in. I don't want my book to feel like it exists for you and only sprang into existence when you started reading that first page. I want you to feel like you're peeking into my characters' lives for a little bit, and then when you leave the book, they will carry on doing what they're doing. I did that in Seven Half Deaths. I've done that in Devil, and it's very purposeful. It's the way I like to write novels. I want them to feel like slices of life. The only thing I would say about seeing Sammy again is that to teach myself the deductive method that he uses, which is the Sherlock Holmesian method, I wrote 7 short stories with him and Arendt, and they are very, very Sherlock Holmes. I mean, they are just pure pastiche. They've got very Sherlocky kind of names as adventures. So like, there is one about a guy's wife who returns from the dead to get him to build a church in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere. That's one of the mysteries. So, and there's 7 of those. And I did those purely as an exercise, but my publisher's really interested in them, and I don't want to publish them. I think that's cheap, but I would like to sort of get them out into different places and just scatter them around and see if there's interesting things we can do with them.
Oh, very cool. I love that. Oh, you've given us, that's an exciting little tidbit there. I think people will be looking for that now. So we have Rhonda, so still going on characters here. Rhonda would like to know, how do you pick the names of your characters?
I'm running out at this point. Like I had like 20 main characters in Seven Deaths, so like I had to move to Holland basically for my second book to find an entire new slew of names. I'm gonna end up in sort of like Greece for the next novel, picking Greek names because I use them all. So for this one, a lot of them came from the real life incident that sparked the novel.
Sure.
So yeah, so a few of the characters have got their names from that. The rest actually all came from passenger manifests. So when I was doing the research for the novel, I looked over a bunch of passenger manifests from this period of people who were on these boats traveling back and forth, and I just picked out the cool sounding names and just circled them. And I was like, I'll take that, I'll take that, I'll take that one. So a lot of the names came from that process. And then the problem I found actually in the research was that a lot of these Dutch names in this period were very, very similar, incredibly similar. So it was really hard. So a few I had to invent that wouldn't have been around, or they would have been from neighbouring sort of like, they would have been Germanic. So Drecht isn't a Dutch name, it's from Germanic, but it could have sort of come in because he would have been on board the ship. So I had to drift outside my lane just a little bit.
Okay, very cool. All right, we have one more character-based question here. This comes from April, who says, I love that you had strong female characters. I'm curious, why did you decide to have Leah be the inventor of the folly?
Because it was a curse. I love the idea of, again, inverting things. So the agency of these women, their strength, everything that would make them wonderful detectives now is actually a curse to them in this period. I thought that was great. And Leah couldn't have done anything worse than be a genius and invent something that would change the world. In 1634, that would have been witchcraft of the highest order. It would have made her a target. It would have lowered her value to her father rather than raised it. And as I said, in every instance, I want to make challenges for my characters to overcome, because that's how you're going to learn about them. That's how you're going to see their resilience and their strength. You're going to see how they solve problems. So for Leah, and it also tested the bond between the mother and the daughter, between sort of Sarah and her daughter, like how the length she would go to protect her and how she felt about that. How would you, because I have a daughter and I can't imagine anything worse than telling my precocious, talented, wonderful, clever daughter to be less precocious, less wonderful, less talented, because it's dangerous to her. It broke my heart. So I wanted that for Sarah, and I wanted that relationship explored. And it's just a nice problem. And also, like, you want your characters. I love my characters. I fall in love with everyone I write, and I want them to be special. I want to give them something that is awesome. So that was her awesome thing.
That's great. I love it. Oh, how cool. All right, so looking on the list of questions again. So moving off of characters, and let's go to the boat. We have a couple of questions about the boat itself. So we have Rhonda asking, did these boats have things like trapdoors and hidden compartments? Or tell us, when you actually were on that boat, what did you see this kind of stuff, and did that sort of add to the whole mystery element when you've got like secret places?
So they would have had smuggling compartments. That part came from the historical research. So if you were a senior officer, you could have got a smuggling compartment built into these boats, and you would have smuggled your own sort of cargo. You would have put your own thing there to get it past the customs to make yourself a little bit of side money on the side. So they would have been riddled with these compartments, just little like latches that would have come down and stuff. And over time, the older the ship got, the more of these things would have been built into it, until it would have been very, very surprising how much extra stuff would have fit into this ship. There's even examples during this period of like a ship, very famous ships that were built with two hulls. So the external hull, and then there was the internal hull, and between those was that they smuggled all sorts of things. So yeah, there would have been plenty of trapdoors, and there would have been plenty of compartments. Not quite as elaborate maybe as in my novel, but again, we talk about heightened realities in these novels, and I think I give myself that little bit of extra leeway.
Artistic license.
But you want the book to be fun, so anything
Right?
that aids it being fun.
I love it. I love it. So still talking about the boat. So Mitzi, she says, so the rooms you described, they're so small. Where did the women keep these multiple heavy dresses?
So
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the multiple heavy dresses actually would have been probably what, 2 or 3 heavy dresses. So there would have been, and the bits of them. So I can't. Sorry, this was like historical research, but the bits, the bustle, is that a bustle thing now? Those things would have been taken out and used in multiple dresses. So that would have gone over to one side, and it would have been kept in a separate compartment. So that would have been like the maid. She would have had somewhere to put that. The dresses themselves would have been very thick and very heavy and made of incredibly heavy materials. But these drawers were actually relatively deep that they had on, so they would have been able to fit a fair few in there and then push them to one side. And again, they would have had other spaces for those things to go in or board the ship. What I didn't want to do, again, as we said earlier, was I didn't want to make it a Wikipedia article where I'm constantly like, and I learned this from Seven Deaths as well. You try and guess as many questions as your reader is going to have about your story.
Sure.
But if you answer every one of them, then you end up sort of like answering questions that half of your readership aren't interested in. So it's really interesting to be like, okay, yes, they've got all these dresses. At what point did she change from that dress to that dress? The biggest thing actually on that point was the anchor, when they weighed anchor and when they set sail again. There was constantly, because, they would have done this operation about 40 times a voyage. And I just got to the point where I was just constantly telling you when they were weighing anchor and raising sail. And I just got to the end of it and was just like, I just need to start finding other ways of telling you that this ship is in motion or this ship has stopped. And that became like a really weirdly challenging part of the book.
So this is a good segue, talking about not wanting to answer questions that haven't been asked or wanting to turn it into a Wikipedia article. We have Kate, who is saying, as an avid nonfiction reader, she is curious to know what parts of your book do you think will appeal to those not traditionally into fiction? And so I'm thinking it's this kind of historical, the fact that this was a real ship. And right, is that what you think? Did you kind of have maybe some nonfiction readers in mind, or?
No, I never. It's interesting. I treated it as an entirely a mystery novel. So, and I start with the mystery novel. Again, as I said with this one, I started with the real life incident. So I think if you're interested in this period of history and like just a mystery set at a boat at sea in this period with a really interesting bunch of characters all up to something, then you'll go for this book. But I don't generally, I think about my readers in the sense that I'm constantly trying to outguess them as I'm reading along. So I'm trying to think as I write my plots, I'm like, what are they thinking at this point? Okay, how do I subvert that trope? How do I go around them? How do I give them what they want, but take it in an opposite direction? But I'm not thinking about the final readership, if that makes sense. I'm not thinking about what genre this book is going to go into, because I'm just writing my story and trying to tell it the best way I possibly can. And I kind of go into whatever genre that leads me into. So I would say for this novel, like if you like atmosphere, if you like twists and turns, if you like a fun, entertaining read with characters who I think you quite like to go to the pub with, this book will probably be for you. But I take all that history in and I loved reading it. But like where that history doesn't service my fun plot, I jettison it and I throw it overboard. And I do introduce things onto the ship that wouldn't have been historically relevant. These characters do have a lot more agency than they would have historically had. So again, I make no apologies for that. I make no bones for it because I just want to tell the most entertaining story I possibly can.
Got it. That's awesome. All right. Well, I think because we want to let you get to bed since it's 1 o'clock in the morning there, we won't go over. So I'm going to start wrapping it up here. I wanted to thank everyone for participating in the event tonight. Everyone who asked a question, even if it didn't get asked, sorry, we went through a lot to get through there. Everyone who submitted a question and participated, we've got the good folks at Sourcebooks have picked 3 winners. We've got April Hobson, Nick Kaler, and Kate Lawson. If the 3 of you would please email Tiffany from Sourcebooks. Her email is right there in the chat, tiffany.schultz@sourcebooks.com. She's going to get prizes over to you. So thanks so much for everyone who participated in that. So Stuart, it really has been very fun to talk with you again. As Stuart said, he and I got to chat earlier this year, earlier in pandemic times. We did an interview for Library Reads for our book expo. You can find that on the Library Reads website, which is libraryreads.org. And if you go to the events page, there's a link there to our YouTube page. You can see the video where we've chatted before, but it was really delightful to get to chat with you again. Thank you so much for spending your late night with us. I appreciate that very much. It was a joy to talk to you.
You too, Rebecca. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in and being wonderful. You are all the best. I love you speakers.
Thank you everyone so much for joining us. And make sure that you join us for the next Murder at the Library event. That one is going to be Wednesday, January 27th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And we'll be talking with best-selling author Greer McAllister. Greer is the author of a new novel that is part mystery, part girl power story, part legal thriller, and part courtroom drama. You won't want to miss this one. It's titled The Arctic Fury, and it was a December 2020 Library Reads pick. Yay! So Tiffany has put that registration link for next month's event in the chat and in the comments. So go ahead and register for that Murder at the Library Book Club event. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us tonight. I hope you all stay safe and happy reading, everyone. Thanks again, Stu.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.